What's going on, everyone? This is the CANAM Fantasy Football Podcast. And today, we're chatting about draft lessons learned in 2020. 2020 has been a crazy year for all of us. Of course, COVID hit, and now we're dealing with an off-season with no preseason games to crib off of. So, what did we learn in this unique environment? We're going to go through that with you today on the pod. But first off, hello. I'm Ryan Phillip Lamb. To my left, at least on the screen, my left is Aetan Hensby. Aetan, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Doing good.
We're just a couple days away from the kickoff, and it feels like Christmas over here, man. I'm excited, and I can't wait.
Yeah, this episode is going to drop pretty much the day before the first game, the actual first football game of 2020. So I'm super stoked. We're going to go ahead and rotate counterclockwise. Devan Christodoulou, looking sharp in your Patriots cap. What's going on, man?
Hey, what's up? Feeling good after the long weekend. Had a lot of drafts go down and had some nice time with the fam jam, and really looking forward to Thursday night football here.
No doubt. We all are, for sure. Randy Rutherford, how are you? I see those clubs in the background. Did you go golfing again?
I did go golfing again.
Gee.
Yeah. And let me tell you, I was fucking terrible. I had the worst round I've had in many years, but it didn't matter. I had a great time. I love golfing, so who cares?
Well, that's all that matters. So long as you love what you do, you're going to have fun no matter what. And hey, we love fantasy football. That's why we're talking about fantasy football. If you want to talk about fantasy football with us, go ahead and click like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. We're currently doing a drive for 500 subscribers. You'll enter to win a signed Amari Cooper jersey. We're going to have more information about that later in the show. But why don't we go ahead and we'll go around the horn. Going to ask you guys a few questions about what we learned during this draft process in 2020. So, Randy, starting off, how did COVID affect your process? I mean, we had, like I said, no preseason. It seemed like there was a ton of random injuries. We couldn't really assess them because none of them happened on the field visually for us to see. Is this the new normal, or will it return to preseason games next season?
You know what? That's a good question, and to be honest, at this point, I'm really not sure. I think it could be the new normal or some hybrid in between, but I don't think we're very likely to ever see the 4 full preseason games again. I think that if this isn't the new normal, there's gonna be some hybrid in between.
That's fair. Dev, just name off one thing that changed for you for your draft preparation this year.
Well, for the majority of my drafts, it's interesting because I'm in keepers or dynasty type leagues. So I would say if I was doing a redraft, I would have been more hesitant to take rookies, for example, just because of no preseason games. So not being able to see them, give them the old eye test and whatnot was certainly a factor. And we had to rely upon a lot of reports coming out of camp. Usually we like to get different perspectives on that. And because of COVID, we were limited on the information we were receiving. But for me, because I was in a lot of drafts that were keepers and dynasty leagues, I just rolled the dice. At the end of the day, I was just like, I'm just going to roll the dice. I'm going to just draft like I normally would. And if the season's a wash, it's a wash.
No doubt. And I love that point that you bring up. It's actually been one of my mainstays whenever I go into drafting. I read endlessly. I read as much beat reporting as I can. And typically I stay away from the positive reports because, I feel like players can look really great because they're professional football players, they're professional athletes, So it'd be easy to fall into the trap of just assuming that a player is doing really well from positive beat reporting. However, the eye test is usually pretty good when it comes to negative beat reporting. What's your take on that, Aetan?
Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that. I mean, the coaches are, they're not going to go out there and dunk on their players for no reason in the media unless they're really underperforming. So, yeah, most of the time, these and the beat reporters as well, they're looking at the team with rose-colored glasses. The competition isn't as high, the hits aren't as big and as extreme. Defensive players aren't going to blow up their receivers because it's the middle of a practice and you don't want to hurt anyone. So it is very difficult to take any words from training camp too seriously. There's obviously certain pieces of it that you do have to take, and you have to take with some legitimacy to it, such as who's winning what starting roles and who's playing on the first teams. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to like how a player is actually performing, it's tough to you can get overhyped with some of the reports. And as you said, once the negative reports start hitting, those are the ones you really should be paying attention to, because it's not a good sign. It's not a good sign when they're not positive reviews in training camp, because this is the easiest point of the football season they'll get.
Yeah, and I would say the biggest thing that you'd want to fade as a player when you're reading content regarding player reports and whatnot, ignore almost everything a coach says, because coaches are going to typically talk up all of their players. How many times have we heard Bruce Arians, for instance, state that, oh, this is definitely going to be my lead back? And then it end up being someone completely different. That's happened so many times. Well, it's funny that I should mention that. Four times.
Pretty sure the count is at 4.
And suddenly we are. Well, I think if we're considering 4, isn't that kind of like the Rojo and Fournette situation then?
Oh, 100%.
So you believe that Fournette is going to overtake the job?
100%.
How soon?
Not a matter of if, it's just when. I think it'll take a couple weeks, but if Fournette starts playing early, and very clearly he's going to show that he's a far superior runner, far superior everything to Rojo, and he's just going to get the keys to the backfield. It's going to happen.
But Ronald Jones has worked on his pass protection all offseason, Randy.
Well, good for him. He's still not good as Leonard Fournette.
It's going to be quite interesting to see. I like you said, I personally feel like it's not if but when. But, I'm kind of rooting for him in a way. Like, if he's really worked hard at pass pro and he can show improvement, who knows? Maybe he could hold Fournette off for more than one game. Let's go around the horn. Dev, then Aetan. How many games before Fournette takes over? And then we'll end off with Randy.
I would say halfway into the game 2.
Okay. That's really early. Aetan.
I mean, if you're making me pick a spot, geez, I'll go even earlier. I'll just say after one game. I'll say after 3 quarters. I mean, it depends. Like, running backs, they don't. The playbook isn't as complicated for them as it is for every other position on the field. They're basically told what their gaps are and what their holes are, and run this way, run that way, or find your hole. Like, it's not a position that takes a huge amount of time to accustom to the playbook. So I think Fournette's ready to go immediately if he's healthy. I mean, the only thing that I think could potentially derail this guy is his attitude. If he goes in there with a bad attitude, he's going to be rudely disappointed because Brady won't put up with it. But if he's going in there and he's going to be a professional, which I hope he is, I hope he's taking everything seriously here, then yeah, I think he's going to take it within 3 quarters.
Randy, finish this off.
You know what? When we first started talking about it in our group chat, I basically said the same thing, that Rojo is going to blow a pass blocking assignment, Brady's going to get hammered, and that's going to be it. I tend to agree with Aetan and Devan that 1 or 2 games max. I think the leash is short, and all it's going to take is just one really bad missed assignment, and that'll be that. I don't think it's going to take long at all.
That's fair. Well, all those people who have drafted Leonard Fournette are feeling a little bit better about his situation. They're going to have to be patient. If you drafted Fournette, do be patient. I do feel like he's going to take over the job as well. It seems like everybody thinks that. It very much is. It's the probability at this point. So at this point, this whole group, us four, as well as Tyler, who's not on the show today, have drafted a ton of leagues. We're all in a bunch of leagues. Why don't we talk a little bit about some strategies that worked and didn't work in drafts? Like, for instance, let me start off by saying that I noticed that owners this year were more onto the trendier sleepers. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we were all forced, as the fantasy community was, to do our research, to do our homework, which is actually a great point. Do your homework. Definitely study up on the team, study up on the players, figure out who the trendier sleepers are, know your rookies, and know the probability of them getting a good role. And yeah. Why don't we go around the horn again? We'll go counterclockwise. Aetan, what was one of the draft strategies that you felt really worked for you?
One of the draft strategies that I felt really worked for me is making sure that you take 3 running backs in the first 6 rounds. I find the drop-off just got so extreme after that point, and there was some good dart throws near the end of the draft, but every time that I didn't get three running backs, even in the first 5, by the time that 6th round came, I felt I was needing to have to take a running back there just to necessitate it. And I wasn't overly happy with what I was seeing there. So I started to realize that you really do have to pound those running backs pretty heavily. And, don't be afraid to reach for your guy, because people are reaching pretty big for running backs like they always do every year.
Beautiful. Dev.
So if this is like post-draft thoughts, I think what I've realized is don't be afraid to draft your guys. Like Aetan kind of was just talking about there. If there's a guy that you really want and you have a good feeling about, reach for him. And the reason that is because I would rather be wrong about a guy that I love and deal with that myself than not get the guy I want and go with a guy who has, based on ADP and value, who you don't really want, but you're doing it because of the value and ADP, and then they don't pan out to be good. And you're kind of like, you get shafted and you felt they weren't going to be that good. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I knew. I would rather be wrong. I would rather own my own mistake. And so at the end of your draft, you want to have fun. You want to look at your fantasy team and go, man, I like these guys. I like my chances this year. So, I would say don't be afraid to just reach for guys that you like.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, to the degree where I have drafted teams before where I drafted someone who I felt was, this person's a value at this particular spot. And then they end up doing miserably, and I never believed in that player in the first place. And I was like, what the hell was the point of that? I get that it's really cool to be like, well, guess what? ADP says X or Y. Draft stud players that you believe in, because then you're going to feel a lot better about cheering on your team instead of looking at a team like, I got this guy for a value, but he's sitting on my bench and he sucks. He's never going to make my starting lineup. I don't know what I did. I don't know why I did anything. Jeez. Randy, give us one post-draft observation or one strategy that worked for you.
Actually, this is where I'm going to go against the grain. I was actually drafting for value mostly. This isn't to say that if there's a guy I really didn't like that I was still drafting him. But I've definitely opened the door more to just taking the value that's there, not worrying too much about the positions. However, that all said, I did end up very running back heavy in basically every draft because that's frankly where the value is. So I wasn't, it's not like I was fading running backs or anything. I was worried more about drafting for value rather than reaching for my guys, which I did do, but just kind of what you were talking about, drafting a guy you don't believe in and watching him suck. Counterpoint to that, and an anecdote from our shared league, CANAM. I was not at all a Kenny Galladay believer last year, and he just kind of fell in the draft, fell into my lap, and I begrudgingly drafted him for value. And going into this year, knowing what we know about him, I have to say that I am ecstatic that I made that decision. So maybe just don't shy away from guys that you don't necessarily believe in, because you might have a bust, but you could have a boom in there as well. So,
well, let me just qualify that by saying, get your guy. But I mean, if your guy is like a 8th round, ninth round sleeper flyer candidate that you believe in, don't draft him in the 1st or 2nd. You know, you do want to get value in there for sure. And I totally appreciate where you're coming from, Randy. I personally would like to do my homework, have a better idea of the player that I'm drafting ahead of time, and know what my likes and dislikes are of that player before I get them. But I totally get where you're coming from. Definitely drafting for value. Great advice. Let's continue around this circle, because this counterclockwise circle is working for me. Aetan, what is one thing that didn't go well for you in your drafts this season that you would change if you could?
I mean, I could put a big ego on and say nothing, but
how dare you?
I guess I can't do that. It just seemed to me like there was definitely a lot of times where there were some of my players that I was really high on that were getting sniped. So there was definitely opportunities. Like the one thing that I did realize doing drafts earlier and then having a draft come up a week or two later is I wish that I had paid more attention to the changes in the rankings from the actual draft sites we were using. So we used a lot of Yahoo sites, and it would have been very good knowledge for me at the time to realize that a draft 3 weeks ago and then a draft, last night, the difference of how much the players have changed in those time frames was quite huge. So players that you weren't used to seeing going because you did all your mock drafts earlier, players that you weren't used to seeing going at certain points were all of a sudden going higher because the Yahoo changed their rankings, and vice versa. Players that you were really high on all of a sudden fell really far down the list, and you kind of forgot about them. And then all of a sudden you see someone dropped him, and you go, "Oh, geez, I didn't even see him on my screen. I forgot all about that guy, and I really wanted him." So it's definitely I think definitely just keeping up to date with the changes of draft positions is definitely something I'm going to be looking to do more of next year and keeping on top of.
I love that. That was actually going to be what I said, so thanks for taking that. That's perfect. It's a good thing we talked about what we were going to talk about before the show. But no, honestly, I love that. And, for me personally, when I'm developing my draft cheat sheets, because I love having my own cheat sheets because it gives me a chance to have a process. Like for me, draft season is a process, and I like to do my own individual rankings. I like to assess the players myself, and usually I start off cribbing from Fantasy Pros to get an idea of what the industry is looking at. And then from there, I make my adjustments depending on how I decide to rank players or teams or situations. So for me, I totally agree with you, going into one site, whether you're drafting on Yahoo or ESPN or Flea Flicker or Sleeper or whatever, get familiar with that particular set of rankings before you go into the draft, because that's going to help you a ton. Dev, what would you say is one thing that you would have liked to do better, or one thing that kind of didn't go your way this draft season?
Well, I think one thing I would do is I would prepare myself for the worst case scenario better. I would go in and I would look at the board and look at every guy that I would like to have in my spot, and just imagine that they're all gone. They're all gone, and have like 2 or 3 backup plans in place. Just as an example, a draft over on the weekend, a PPR league. I tried to prepare for what might happen, and I wanted a wide receiver to fall to me. I didn't expect one of the GMs ahead of me to take, he had 2 firsts, and he took 2 wide receivers. He needed a running back, but he decided to change his strategy compared to previous years, and he went heavy wide receiver. That threw me off, and I had to just I ended up with Cam Akers, which I don't mind at all, but the point is, basically just prepare yourself for the worst case scenario. You're not going to get, it's not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen. Even if you're in leagues where you've been with the guys for 7 to 10 years and you think you might know their tendencies, people change their strategies and anything can happen. So just be prepared for that.
I love that. There was actually an article on The Athletic about the mental game, because there is a mental game when it comes to drafts, your specific drafts. So what that article, and I'm just paraphrasing, it's really good. Go to The Athletic and search it up if you want. I'll leave the link in the description below. It's basically stating, have you ever, to use a poker analogy, and Randy will appreciate this, have you ever been on tilt? Sometimes when you're going into your drafts, you can kind of get tilted from the fact that you're getting sniped, left and right. And so what this article is talking about is kind of approach your draft, and every single round that's going to happen, just convince yourself, oh, my player is going to be gone. Have your strategy, but convince yourself, oh, okay, you know what? Someone's going to take that player before me. That way, you're doing what Devan is recommending and having a worst case scenario for that particular round, and do it each round. But also, if the player you want ends up being where you want to draft them, it's like a pleasant surprise every time. And it helps you from getting tilted. Randy, how about you? One thing that you would have done differently this draft season?
I think especially getting into the later rounds, like after round 5, because the first few rounds, I feel like decision making is pretty automatic. You know who you're getting, you have a list of guys, and 99.9% of the time, one of those guys is going to be there. But when it's getting later and it comes to roster construction, and you really have to take a bit more time to survey the situation. And one thing I've generally prided myself on is that I'm a quick drafter and make very quick decisions. But I think what I would prefer to do in the future is just, especially later, take just 10, 15 seconds, really survey the situation before I make a pick, because I can think of 3 or 4 picks right now that I made the pick and instantly was like, fuck. Like I made the pick, and within like the next pick or the pick after saw a name there that I'm just like, damn it, that's definitely who I wanted. And had I taken the extra time to really just process everything, I would have made the correct decisions. So definitely just give myself a little more time and really evaluate the situation before just mashing draft without thinking too much about it.
No doubt. Well, those are just some of our observations from this year's draft season. I really hope that you had a good draft season. I had a lot of fun. I still have a few leagues that I'm going to be drafting very shortly, which is really cool. But going forward, you're going to get a lot more content from us. So go ahead and, if you haven't yet, click like and subscribe. It takes you 2 seconds, and it really helps us out. And guess what? You have a chance to win a signed Amari Cooper jersey. This is how. Join us in our drive for 500 subscribers, and you could win a signed Amari Cooper jersey. Are you new to the channel? Give us a like, subscribe, and click the notify bell. It helps a ton for a new channel like ours. We're going to have a random draw for a signed Amari Cooper jersey shipped anywhere in North America. So go ahead, click subscribe, and thank you for watching the CANAM Fantasy Football Podcast.